What if I told you that the British Broadcasting Corporation, the venerable BBC, once convinced thousands of its viewers that spaghetti grows on trees? No, you didn't mishear. And what if I told you that for 40 years, the entire scientific community believed the missing link in human evolution was found in a gravel pit in England, when it was actually just an ape's jaw glued to a human skull? Before deepfakes, before Photoshop, before that relative on social media started sharing articles from a website called realtruthfacts.biz, there was the golden age of the hoax. An era of pure, unadulterated audacity, where con artists, pranksters, and even national broadcasters played the world for a fool. These weren't just simple pranks. These were masterpieces of deception, engineered to exploit our deepest hopes, our greatest fears, and our simple, trusting nature. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the greatest hoaxes that ever fooled the world. We'll find out how they did it, why people fell for it, and what these bizarre tales can teach us in our own age of misinformation. So grab your tinfoil hats and your thinking caps. This is going to get weird. Our journey into glorious gullibility begins on April 1st, 1957.
The date is important.
The BBC's flagship current affairs program, Panorama, think of it as the most serious, most respected news show on British television, aired a 3-minute segment that would go down in history. The segment reported on a record-breaking spaghetti harvest in the canton of Ticino, Switzerland. The esteemed broadcaster Richard Dimbleby narrated with his signature gravitas. The 2 weeks of mild weather have resulted in an exceptionally heavy spaghetti crop, and the last of the spaghetti pests, the spaghetti weevil, has been virtually exterminated. He said it with a straight face. He talked about the tremendous strides made in cultivating spaghetti stalks of a uniform length. Disbelieving. Can you even imagine? Explaining. Now, you have to understand. In 1950s Britain, spaghetti wasn't a common dish. It was exotic, something you might get in a tin, probably smothered in a slightly disgusted, questionable tomato sauce. Most Brits had no earthly idea where it actually came from. So, when the most trusted voice in the nation told them people were picking it from trees, well, a shocking number of brains just went, okay, I guess that's how it works then. The BBC switchboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Hundreds of people called in. Some questioned the story's authenticity, but many, many more were genuinely curious. They wanted to know if they could buy their own spaghetti bush. They asked for tips on how to grow a spaghetti tree in their own backyard. To these callers, the BBC staff reportedly replied with a perfect British deadpan. Place a sprig of spaghetti in a tin of tomato sauce and hope for the best. The next day, the hoax was revealed, and the nation had a collective laugh at itself. It was a beautiful, simple prank that worked because it targeted a blind spot in people's knowledge and was delivered by an unimpeachable source. In an age before the internet, who were you to argue with the BBC? It's a perfect, lighthearted reminder that hearing isn't always believing, especially on April Fool's Day. From a harmless prank, we move to a hoax that poisoned the well of science for over 4 decades. This is the story of the Piltdown Man, the missing link that never was. In 1912, an amateur archaeologist named Charles Dawson made a stunning announcement. He claimed to have found fragments of a skull and jawbone in a gravel pit in Piltdown, England. When the fragments were assembled by the British Museum, they seemed to represent the missing link between apes and humans. It had the large brain of a human, but the primitive jaw of an ape. They called him Eoanthropus dawsoni, or Dawson's Dawn Man. And the British scientific establishment went absolutely wild for it. Why? 2 words: confirmation bias, and a dash of national pride. At the time, major fossil discoveries were coming from France and Germany. Britain felt left out of the paleoanthropological party. The Piltdown Man was their ticket to the dance. He was British. He proved that the big brain, the seat of intellect, of civilization, evolved first. It fit their preconceived notions of human evolution perfectly. For 40 years, the Piltdown Man was a star. He was in textbooks, he was displayed with pride in museums. Over 500 scientific papers were written about him. Any evidence that contradicted him was either ignored or explained away. But there were always whispers. The jaw just didn't quite fit the skull. The teeth were worn down in a very weird way. Finally, in 1953, the truth came out. A team of scientists used new dating techniques, including fluorine testing, which measures how long a bone has been buried. The results were shocking. The skull was from a medieval human. The jawbone was from a modern orangutan. Someone had taken the jaw, broken it, stained both pieces with chemicals to make them look ancient, and filed down the teeth to mimic a human wear pattern. It was a deliberate, elaborate fraud. Can you believe that? For 40 years, the pride of British science was a Frankenstein's monster of a fossil cooked up in a shed. The prime suspect remains Charles Dawson himself, the man who discovered it, though we'll never know for sure. The Piltdown Man is a brutal lesson in how even the most brilliant minds can be fooled when a story is just too good to question. It shows how the desire to believe can be more powerful than the desire to know. If you can't trust scientists, surely you can trust the creator of the world's most logical detective, right?
Wrong!
Meet the Cottingley fairies. In 1917, two young cousins from Cottingley, England, Elsie Wright, age 16, and Frances Griffiths, age 9, claimed they played with fairies in the woods near their home. They said they had proof. The girls insisted their 5 photographs showing them surrounded by tiny winged fairies dancing were real. To a modern ear, it sounds absurd. The fairies were paper cutouts, copied by Elsie, a talented artist, from a children's book, with wings added and propped up with hat pins. But these photos found their way to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Ironically, the man who invented the hyper-rational detective was a passionate spiritualist. He desperately wanted to believe in a world of spirits, ghosts, and fairies. The photos were his proof. He saw them as a sign of a new spiritual era and published them in the Strand magazine in 1920, declaring them authentic. If the man who invented Sherlock Holmes believed it, who were the public to argue? The story became an international sensation. Skeptics pointed out the fairies' fashionable hairstyles and two-dimensional appearance, but believers, led by Doyle, brushed them aside. This wasn't a hoax, they argued. It was evidence of a higher plane of existence. The truth didn't come out until 1983, when the cousins, now elderly women, confessed. They admitted they'd staged the photos to get back at adults who teased them for believing in fairies. They thought it would be a small family joke. They never imagined it would fool the entire world, let alone Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In a strange twist, Frances maintained until her death that the 5th and final photo, the fairy sunbath, was actually real. The Cottingley fairy saga is a fascinating look at our collective desire to find magic in the mundane. It shows that no matter how smart or logical we think we are, if we want to believe in something, we'll find a way to justify it, even if it's just cardboard fairies held up by hat pins. We interrupt this program to bring you a special bulletin. At approximately 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey. October 30th, 1938, the night before Halloween. A 23-year-old theatrical genius named Orson Welles was about to unleash chaos upon the airwaves, or so the legend goes. His Mercury Theater on the Air adapted H.G. Wells's sci-fi classic, The War of the Worlds, for radio. But instead of a straight narration, Welles structured the first half as a series of simulated news bulletins, interrupting a program of dance music. The effect was shockingly realistic. The reports grew increasingly frantic. The meteorite was actually a metal cylinder. Martians were emerging. They had heat rays. They were vaporizing entire army battalions. The story goes that America panicked. People fled their homes. They clogged highways. They prayed in the streets, convinced the end of the world was at hand. A nationwide mass hysteria event, all sparked by a radio play. It's an incredible story, and it's also a hoax about a hoax. Did some people panic? Absolutely. There were scattered reports of terrified listeners calling the police. But the idea of a nationwide panic was a wild exaggeration, gleefully fanned by the newspaper industry. In the 1930s, radio was the new sexy medium, siphoning advertising dollars away from newspapers. The papers hated radio and were looking for any excuse to paint it as irresponsible and dangerous. The War of the Worlds broadcast was the perfect opportunity. They seized on the scattered reports of panic and blew them up into front-page headlines, portraying Welles as a reckless fearmonger and radio as a public menace. They created the myth of the mass panic to discredit their rival. The reality is the broadcast had multiple disclaimers stating it was a work of fiction. The audience for the Mercury Theater was also relatively small. Most of America was listening to the far more popular Chase and Sanborn Hour on another network. So the real hoax wasn't necessarily the Martian invasion. It was the story of the panic that followed. It's a masterclass in how media can shape a narrative, proving that in the age of fake news, sometimes the fakest news is the news about the fake news itself. It's a timeless lesson that remains terrifyingly relevant today. Our top spot goes to a man, a con artist so smooth, so audacious, he belongs in a league of his own. His name was Count Victor Lustig, and he was the man who sold the Eiffel Tower. The year is 1925. The Eiffel Tower, built for the 1889 World's Fair, was never meant to be permanent. It was expensive to maintain, and many Parisians still considered it an eyesore. Sensing an opportunity, Lustig gathered a small group of the city's top scrap metal dealers for a secret meeting at a luxurious hotel. He introduced himself as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He explained with great regret that the city could no longer afford the tower's upkeep. The decision had been made. The Eiffel Tower was to be dismantled and sold for scrap. The deal was to be kept top secret, he insisted, to avoid public outcry. He was there to offer them, the most trusted dealers in the industry, the exclusive chance to bid on 7,000 tons of prime Parisian iron. The dealers were hooked. But one of them, André Poussin, was a bit insecure. He was new to the inner circle and desperate to make his mark. Lustig sensed this. In a private meeting, Lustig confessed that his government salary was meager and that a man of his position was expected to entertain lavishly. He was, in other words, asking for a bribe to seal the deal. For Poussin, this was the final convincing detail. A corrupt government official? That sounded exactly right. The bribe proved the deal was legitimate. He handed over a briefcase full of cash for the winning bid, plus a hefty bribe on the side. Lustig took the money and immediately fled to Vienna. He waited, scanning the newspapers every day for the story to break. But nothing happened. Poussin was so utterly humiliated that he never told a soul. And here is the most incredible part of the story. A month later, Lustig returned to Paris, gathered a different group of scrap dealers, and sold the Eiffel Tower to them all over again. This time, the victim went to the police, and Lustig had to flee the country for good. Victor Lustig's con was a work of psychological genius. He didn't just sell a landmark. He sold a story. He played on greed, ambition, and most importantly, shame. He knew his victims would be too embarrassed to admit they'd been fooled. It stands as perhaps the most audacious con of all time, a testament to the fact that with enough confidence, you can sell just about anything. So what do a spaghetti harvest, a fake fossil, paper fairies, a Martian invasion, and a sold monument all have in common? They show us that a good hoax is a mirror. It reflects our own biases, our desires, our blind spots, and our willingness to trust. From the authority of the BBC to the ego of the scientific community, every one of these stories found a crack in our critical thinking and wedged itself inside. In an era of AI-generated images and algorithm-fueled misinformation, these tales from the past are more than just amusing anecdotes. They are essential reminders. They teach us to question what we hear, to challenge authority, and to be humble enough to admit when we might be wrong. Because the con artists and pranksters are still out there. They've just traded their gravel pits and hat pins for keyboards and code. So here's my question for you. What's a modern hoax or piece of fake news that you think will go down in history? Or which of these classic hoaxes did you find the most unbelievable? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoy unraveling the world's weirdest wonders, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the delightfully strange. Until next time, stay curious.